And the tides went out, and 1,500 extras wearing wristwatches and a period piece. Other than that.
No one could have imagined that Steve McQueen, the king of cool, the untouchable rebel of Hollywood, would one day whisper his final regrets, not on a movie set, but from a hospital bed, broken, voiceless, and forgotten by the very world that once worshipped him. He was the man every guy wanted to be, the womanizer, the speed addict, the outlaw with a smirk that made directors bend and producers cave. In the 1,960 seconds and 70 seconds, Steve McQueen wasn't just a movie star, he was a cultural phenomenon, the highest-paid actor on Earth, a god in denim and dust. But beneath that iconic image was a man tormented by demons the cameras never captured, a boy abandoned, a husband broken, a father who didn't know how to love. And when the lights finally dimmed, what remained was not fame, not glory, but silence. Why did Hollywood's most powerful rebel vanish at the peak of his reign? What tragedy haunted Steve McQueen in the shadows of the spotlight? And in his final days, what was the one thing he desperately wished he could undo? This is the untold story of Steve McQueen, a man the world thought they knew but never truly understood. And today, we'll uncover the crown he lost and the heart he long before the world knew his name, Steve McQueen was just a scared little boy lost in the back streets of Missouri. Born in 1,930 inches, Beech Grove, Indiana, his life began with abandonment. His father, a stunt pilot, vanished before Steve could even speak. His mother, too young and too troubled, handed him off to relatives like a package no one wanted to sign for. There was no home, only transit, only silence. At the age of 3, Steve was sent to live with his great-uncle Claude in a farmhouse. It was there he first learned to survive, not to trust. The man who raised him was kind but distant, and the boy spent most of his days in the cornfields, alone, talking to the wind. The nights were colder than the winters, and lonelier than any prison. When his mother reappeared, she brought with her a series of violent men stepfathers who beat Steve until he bled. One of them would lock him in a closet for hours. Another once threw him down the stairs. But it wasn't just the fists that bruised him, it was the betrayal. The woman he called Mom never protected him, never said sorry, she just turned away. By the time Steve was a teenager, the streets had become more welcoming than any home. He joined gangs, stole hubcaps, ran from cops. He was sent to the California Junior Boys Republic, a reform school known more for its discipline than compassion. And yet, it was here, amidst concrete walls and cold stairs, that Steve found the first flicker of strength. Not kindness, not hope, just the understanding that he could fight. That survival was, perhaps, his only talent. The staff at the school remembered him as a defiant kid with sharp eyes and a clenched jaw. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was usually to challenge authority. "I never trusted anyone who gave me orders," he once said, "because orders always came with pain." He would later credit the Boys' Republic as the only place that taught him discipline. But even that was soaked in pain. "I learned how to keep my head down and take the hits," he told a reporter years later. "Because that's what life taught me early. You either hit back or you get crushed." There's a picture of young Steve from those years. He's standing alone, arms crossed, face hard as stone, not a trace of childhood joy. Just a wall, already built, brick by brick, around a boy who would grow up to charm millions, yet never fully trust a single soul. His early pain shaped everything: his need to run, his obsession with speed, his deep mistrust of love. The truth was, before Steve McQueen became Hollywood's coolest icon, he was just a broken boy. After barely surviving his youth, Steve McQueen had no dreams, just instincts. The military became his first real escape. At 17, he joined the United States Marine Corps. It wasn't glamour or glory that drew him in, it was structure. It was, ironically, the closest thing to family he had ever known. And yet, true to his nature, Steve rebelled. He was demoted 7 times, spent 41 days in the brig for resisting arrest, and nearly drowned during a training mission. But there, in the harsh rhythm of military life, Steve found something he didn't expect: discipline with purpose. He left the Marines with a small sum, a hardened body, and a mind that couldn't sit still. The chaos of post-war America pushed many toward factories or bars. Steve walked into a New York drama class instead. It was the most unlikely place for someone like him, a scarred ex-Marine with no money, no connections, and a permanent chip on his shoulder. He was accepted into the prestigious neighborhood playhouse, where actors were trained to bleed on stage. Steve didn't bleed. He exploded. The other students studied craft. Steve brought fury. He didn't care for Shakespearean diction or emotional monologues. He just wanted to be seen. And when acting teacher Sanford Meisner tried to tame him, Steve lashed out, not with words, but with sheer, raw presence. "I didn't want to act," he once said. "I wanted to survive, and acting felt like the only way." But survival in Hollywood was a different beast. His first roles were forgettable bit parts in TV shows, background appearances, even playing corpses. He auditioned constantly, rejected repeatedly. Typecast as too intense, too unpredictable, too street. He failed the first time, then again, then again. He'd walk into rooms, only to be dismissed before he spoke a word. His big break came not from talent scouts or studio heads, but from motorcycles. Steve entered a motorcycle race on a dusty California track. He won effortlessly. The adrenaline, the danger, the speed. That moment caught the attention of actor James Garner, who introduced him to a small-time producer. From there, a single line in the show Wanted, Dead or Alive catapulted Steve into America's consciousness. He became the bounty hunter with the slow drawl, the half-sneer, the twitchy fingers. TV made him visible, but it was cinema that would make him immortal. In 1963, The Great Escape made Steve McQueen a legend. But few knew he nearly walked off, set furious at being upstaged, insecure about his role, clashing with the director. Behind the camera, Steve was volatile, suspicious of everyone. "I don't trust the bastards," he'd growl about producers. "They all want something." He fired agents on a whim, insisted on doing his own stunts. He was once nearly killed during a motorcycle jump that he refused to let a double perform. He wanted control, total control, because deep down, he remembered what it felt like to be powerless. And he swore he'd never feel that again. He burned bridges, but he also lit up every scene he entered. What most people never saw was that, beneath the rage, Steve was still that poor, beaten boy trying to prove he was enough. Enough to be seen, enough to matter, enough to make the world remember his name. Success, when it finally came, wasn't sweet. It was bruised, bloodied, and hard-earned. And Steve wore every scar. By the late 1960 seconds, Steve McQueen was no longer just a star, he was the star. With films like Bullet, The Thomas Crown Affair, and Le Mans, he carved out a unique throne in Hollywood. The silent rebel who didn't need monologues, only presence. His stare alone could stop a scene. His walk carried more swagger than a page of dialogue. In 1974, Steve McQueen became the highest-paid actor in the world. That same year, The Towering Inferno cemented his dominance in the box office wars. Studios fought for him. Directors bent to his terms. He demanded control over scripts, costumes, co-stars, and got it. Every rider in his contract was honored, every request met without question. He had, Finally, the power he craved all his life. But with power came paranoia. He started traveling with a gun, refused to attend parties unless he could sit facing the door. He distrusted Hollywood executives, refused interviews, and cut ties with old friends. The man who once charmed everyone on set became increasingly withdrawn. "Fame is just another kind of prison," he once told a confidant, "and I'm the warden and the inmate." The public saw the cars, the women, the watches. Steve owned over 200 motorcycles and sports cars, each one a symbol of his speed, addiction, and perhaps of his need to always stay one step ahead of his past. But behind the scenes, the crown grew heavier. He became notoriously difficult to work with. On the set of Le Mans, he clashed with the entire production team. Millions were wasted. Friends were fired. The film underperformed. But Steve didn't care. He wanted to race, not act. "I don't need the money," he snapped. "I need the thrill." Thrill, however, couldn't replace intimacy. Steve's marriage to actress Neil Adams began to crumble under the weight of affairs, distance, and silence. They had once been deeply in love, soulmates, even. But Steve had changed. Or perhaps he had simply stopped pretending. He cheated relentlessly, drank too much, shut out everyone when he felt vulnerable. And when Neil begged him to slow down, to come home, he said nothing. He simply left. He remarried Ali McGraw, another Hollywood beauty, after stealing her away from producer Robert Evans. But this marriage, too, was built on gasoline and ego. It burned fast and left ashes. "Steve couldn't be still," Ali later said. "He was always running. From what? I don't know." On the outside, he had it all. The mansion, the money, the fame. But inside, Steve McQueen was exhausted, numb, strung out on adrenaline and isolation. He had reached the top, but there was no peace there. Only a view of everything he'd lost to get there. He once looked in the mirror, according to a close friend, and whispered, "Why do I still feel like that scared kid?" Because no crown can silence the cries of a boy never held. No spotlight can heal wounds no one sees. Steve McQueen, the fall didn't happen all at once. It crept in quiet, like rust beneath chrome. By the late 1970s, Steve McQueen was no longer the golden boy of Hollywood. He had disappeared from premieres, declined major roles, and moved far from the bright lights that once worshipped him. The world wondered, where did Steve McQueen go? The truth was more tragic than any headline. He had become a ghost, in his own body, haunted, hollow, and ill. The man who once raced Mustangs through the streets of San Francisco was now gasping for breath after a short walk. In 1979, at just 49 years old, Steve was diagnosed with mesothelioma, a rare and aggressive form of lung cancer. Doctors gave him months to live. He refused to believe them. But deep down, he knew. The cancer was most likely caused by asbestos exposure, ironically from the very marine ships and sets where he had once sought purpose. Hollywood gave him fame. The military gave him strength. Both had unknowingly sentenced him. Even before the diagnosis, Steve had grown reclusive. He moved to a ranch in Santa Paula, California, far from the cameras and critics. There, he tried to find something resembling peace. But it was elusive. He had pushed away almost everyone who once loved him. His children rarely saw him. His second marriage had dissolved. His phone hardly rang. And the mirror, once a place of pride, became unbearable to face. "I'm not who they think I am," he told a nurse. "I never was." The man who had everything now held onto his life with desperation. He turned to alternative treatments, flying to Mexico under false names, trying herbal remedies, coffee enemas, vitamin injections, anything to outrun death. He even smuggled Laetrile, a controversial and banned cancer treatment across the border. His actions weren't those of a madman. They were the choices of someone who had stared at death too young and refused to let it win again. And yet, it did. On the 7th of November 1980, Steve McQueen died during surgery in Juarez, Mexico. No camera was there, no co-stars, no fans, just silence. Just the final exhale of a man who had once outrun everyone but couldn't outrun the cost of being Steve McQueen. The world mourned, but only for a moment. Hollywood moved on, as it always does. What lingered, though, were his regrets. In the months before he died, Steve opened up to a few close friends. He spoke of the women he mistreated, the children he didn't know how to love, the roles he rejected not because they weren't good, but because he was afraid to be vulnerable. He admitted he never truly knew what peace felt like, that he always believed someone would take everything away, that he was tired, so very tired, of fighting ghosts. In one of his last conversations, he reportedly whispered, "I could handle the fame, I just couldn't handle myself." There is a particular loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being misunderstood of your whole life. Steve McQueen wore rebellion like a leather jacket. But inside, he was still that bruised kid from Missouri, begging anyone to see the boy behind the legend. Hollywood gave him a crown, but it came with a coffin. When the noise of the world finally faded, something remarkable happened to Steve McQueen. He began to listen. Not to the crowds, not to the critics, but to his own fractured soul. In the final year of his life, the man once called the King of Cool traded his race cars for quiet prayer and his cigarettes for a Bible. It wasn't performative. There were no interviews, no dramatic declarations, just a quiet transformation rooted not in fear of death, but in the hunger for meaning. At a small church near his Santa Paula ranch, Steve McQueen began attending Sunday services under the radar. He sat in the back row. No entourage, no sunglasses, just Steve the man, not the myth. It was there he met Pastor Leonard DeWitt, a kind, unassuming man who didn't care about fame. They spoke not of movies, but of forgiveness, of grace, of starting over even when time is running out. It was in these moments that Steve cracked open for the first time in years. He spoke of his regrets not in anger, but in sorrow. He wept. He asked if a man like him could still be redeemed. And he listened as the pastor told him, "God isn't impressed with what you've done, but he never stopped loving who you are." Something shifted, slowly, deeply. Steve began volunteering at a local youth center. The man who once said he didn't trust anyone now sat with broken kids and taught them how to rebuild motorcycles. He didn't preach. He didn't boast. He just showed up, quietly, faithfully, every week. It was as if he wanted to go back and save himself through them. In a rare letter written to a friend, Steve described this chapter of his life as the only time I've ever felt clean. He didn't mean physically. He meant free from the rage, the fame, the fear of never being enough. As the cancer worsened, Steve kept a small, worn-out Bible by his bedside. Inside it, he had written one verse in thick pencil, underlined 3 times. "I have fought the good fight." At the start of this story, we asked, what makes a legend cry? What regrets echo louder than applause? What does a king see when the crown slips from his head? For Steve McQueen, the answers weren't found in box office numbers, awards, or roaring engines. They were found in the stillness when the spotlight vanished, and all that remained was a man, staring at the damage done. He had conquered Hollywood, but never truly conquered himself. And yet, in his final months, stripped of fame, strength, and speed, Steve McQueen discovered something far more rare than celebrity. He found peace. He was no longer the rebel without a cause. No longer the boy begging to be seen. He became a man who finally forgave the child he once was. The world remembers him as the King of Cool. But maybe we should remember him as something greater. A man who outran the world, but in the end, stopped running from himself. So here's the question we leave you with. Do the scars we carry define us? Or do they guide us to who we're meant to become? If this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, or even shed a tear, then maybe Steve McQueen's final role was